Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome back to another episode here of your go-to Pacers podcast, Setting the Pace. I'm your host, Alex Gold. I'm joined today by Michael Facci. And Facci, how did you enjoy this July 4th weekend?
It was as free as could be, just like this country. Hey, it was a great July 4th. I laid low, barbecue at my parents' house, just kept it low key, and I was fine with that. Didn't hear too many fireworks. I think it's fine when you have a dog that's scared of fireworks and a small baby that goes to sleep early. So I wasn't complaining, but I ate good on the grill. So what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any dog that's not afraid of fireworks. If we're going to be completely honest, I think every
Yeah.
dog freaks out. But yeah, I mean, honestly, it was a little bit of a bummer. I was going to go fishing on Thursday morning, drove about an hour and a half away to where I was going to fish out on this lake, and it rained us out. So we thought it might split for a couple of hours and we wouldn't have to worry about it, but it was coming down so heavy. Ended up clearing up around 3, but I was not waiting 6 hours of my day just for rain to stop. So got back in the truck, went back home, and then had some time with family, and then went to Cincinnati on Saturday. Went to the zoo with my wife and some friends. So it's a good time. But I will say this: 5 days away since we last recorded. I feel a little bit rusty on the vocal cords here, so I'm trying to loosen them up here.
Been there, honestly. Sometimes if there's ever been something where maybe our last episode that we recorded was on like a Wednesday and we don't record till Sunday or so, I feel it. Sometimes
Yeah.
back when we were in the playoffs, it was every single night. So you're in a rhythm. So, I like to believe that you still got it, but we're going to find out if we both still got it.
I hope I can eventually get it back as we're doing this. But today we're going to be doing an interesting topic, and that is we're going to be discussing the pros and cons to trading for Lauri Markkanen. I believe I heard on a podcast I said that he prefers Lowry, so we'll try to respect that and call him Lauri Markkanen. But I'll probably mess up on that because I've always been calling him Lauri. So regardless, Markkanen is a name that is out there. He is on an expiring contract with the Utah Jazz, who seem to be in a bit of a tank mode trying to kind of rebuild this roster under Danny Ainge. So it looks like there's a lot of people that are inquiring about him. Indiana has not been a name that has been attached to Lauri Markkanen, but I do think that it's a very intriguing conversation, Facci. So we're going to start things out here talking pros and cons. Let's start with the pros. What is one pro that you have for why the Pacers should trade for Lauri Markkanen?
This is a 7-footer who could play the three. He could play the three or the four, and he just turned 27 years old. He is in the absolute prime of his career right now. This would instantly give Indiana a boost in terms of size, shooting, and plenty of other qualities that we'll get into short. But that's my first pro.
Yeah, I think for me, like the age thing is a great point to bring up because it definitely fits that timeline of the Indiana Pacers. Now, I will say this: I'm sure you remember when the Pacers traded for Pascal Siakam. After the trade went through, Zach Lowe came on the low post and basically said that Indiana had called about Lauri Markkanen before they made the trade for Pascal Siakam. So to me, that seems like they had maybe had their sights a little bit higher on Lowry, maybe have him a little bit higher in that pecking order of players they wanted to go after. And if you recall, the Pacers played, I believe it was Denver on a Sunday night where Bruce Brown got his championship ring. Then the following Monday, they had a back-to-back. They played in Utah, and I think they got the break speed off them. It was just a really bad game. But in that pregame presser, Rick Carlisle was talking about Lauri Markkanen and said that he is the coolest thing he has seen since Dirk Nowitzki. So when you're talking about the Pacers head coach, who was also the head coach of Dirk Nowitzki for a long portion of his career, that's the coach that got Dirk his only championship. If he has that much high praise for Lauri Markkanen, I think that to me says a lot about how Rick Carlisle views Lowry and what he thinks of his game.
Yeah, it definitely says a lot. Usually, when Rick's giving you that type of praise, you're traded shortly afterwards. So, I think in this
Well, he's not on his
scenario,
team, so
yeah, exactly. In this scenario, it's pure admiration for Lowry, and I think that that's great stuff. And you could make an argument to say without the accolades, because they're two, one's a Hall of Famer and one is a guy that has never played the playoffs yet. Lowry fits that modern Dirk style where you are that 7-footer that can be a small forward that is a really good 3-point shooter, but also isn't a slouch on the glass. Things like that. So I think that there's a lot to love about Lauri Markkanen, and to hear that praise from a Hall of Fame coach like Rick, who, like you said, coached Dirk, that definitely doesn't feel like he's just pulling that out of thin air.
right. Let's go to another pro here, Facci. What else do you got?
So I think with that addition, you're talking about Indiana was already, a highly prolific offense, I think they would become even more explosive. This is over the last 2 years. Lauri Markkanen, here's his averages: 25 points per game on 49% shooting, over 39% from three, over 8 rebounds per game, 2 assists per game. Really doesn't turn the ball over much or foul much, both under 2 turnovers and under 2 fouls per game. The 8 rebounds, just sticking with that, that would lead the Pacers in rebounding. You already know this is a team that struggled on the glass. To be able to get a boost on the glass and a scoring boost, that says a lot.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I was going to bring up his 3-point shooting as well because the Pacers love to be able to spread the floor. And I think that one of the things that Lauri Markkanen has proven is, like you said, basically shot 40% last year, 39.9%. The year before that was like 39.1. So he is a great 3-point shooter that would fit this team very well and the style they want to play. And I think that with him being, like you said, 27 years old, can shoot the ball at that high of a clip, it seems like a seamless fit to me for Indiana in terms of getting more and more size. And one thing I'm going to add on here too is just Indiana realized that when they play with more size, they're a better team. And I think if you look across the entirety of the Eastern Conference specifically, teams that are winning have a lot of size. And Indiana needs to continue to add to that because at this point last year, their starting small forward was Bruce Brown, Benedict Mathurin, and those guys are undersized small forwards. Aaron Nesmith ended up finishing the season as a starting small forward, but still a little bit of an undersized guy only at 6'5". If you can swap out a 6'5" guard for a 7'3", I mean, that just makes a whole lot of sense to me. So I think we're on the same page here in terms of what Lauri Markkanen's current situation is in terms of like who he is as a player and how he would fit this team. It seems perfect.
It really does. And just the amount of wide open looks that he would get with the Pacers is just incredible. And also, when people say, okay, yeah, he shot 40%, but what's the volume like? It's over 8 attempts per game
Yeah.
last year from three. So the volume is real. This is not someone who's shooting, about 40% from three on 4 attempts per game. It's real. Then another accolade is like you could just see his game has grown over the last 2 years. He made an all-star game. He won most improved player of the year. It doesn't feel like what he's doing is a fluke. It feels that he's taken on more responsibilities, more touches. He's been the guy in Utah, but I also feel that he's probably not meant to be the guy. So being able to be a second or even, dare I say, third option on a team feels like something that would absolutely suit him. And I think his percentages would go through the roof. An already accurate shooter, I think, would have an opportunity to get looks that he has never seen before.
Yeah, and I will say this: Lowry is one of those guys that people have deemed as a bad defender, and over the
Heard it.
last 2 years in Utah, he has gotten so much better as a defensive player. So I think Indiana could really use that size, Facci, and could use someone that can really fit their team very well. Uh, Anything else on the pro side for Lowry that we haven't hit on yet?
Oh, I'm digging deep. I got another. So here's what we got. So the last 2 seasons, he's averaged about 5.5 free throw attempts per game, which would actually lead the Indiana Pacers. Pascal Siakam led the Pacers last year with 4.2 free throw attempts per game. And then you wonder, okay, well, what does he shoot from the line? Well, he shot a hair below 90%. Lowry shot 89.9% from the line. He's a career 87% free throw shooter. So the Pacers have kind of struggled to get to the line. They ranked 21st in the NBA last year in free throws attempted, 20th in free throws made, 13th in free throw percentage. Lauri Markkanen is someone that is instantly, about a 90% free throw shooter. You pair him with Tyrese Halliburton being, a high upper 80%, shooter from the line. I think all of a sudden that's pretty elite.
Yeah, I do have a couple of other things here, Facci, I want to touch on. So I don't know how many more pros you have, but one that I do want to, bring it to the table here. We talked a lot about Obi Toppin getting 100 dunks and making 100 threes. But did you know in 2022 and 2023, the year that Lauri Markkanen was an all-star with the Utah Jazz, he had 100 dunks and 200 three-pointers in that season made?
I absolutely did not, and I am surprised that I don't know how many people heard about that because I feel like that wasn't making news.
Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz became the first NBA player to ever do that, Facci, in 2022,
Wow.
2023. So I think that is very impressive. And then another pro that I was going to bring out here, Facci, is the contract. He is making $18 million right now at
Let's
this
see.
current moment. And if there's any big, if you're seeing the contracts that are getting given out nowadays, I mean, we're talking about Jason Tatum, obviously still in like that second rookie, not second rookie, but second extension he's gotten since that rookie deal. He's going to be getting close to 70 some $1 million in the final year of that contract. So a lot of people are giving out a lot of money right now with the new CBA and things like that, and the new salary and everything that's been going up. So I will just say this: the fact that Lauri Markkanen is only making $18 million is involved in the trade to get Donovan Mitchell to Cleveland. Um, I think that it's really interesting because it wouldn't take as much in terms of salaries to come up with a trade for him. Whereas if you were trying to trade for somebody like a Paul George, who's in the 48, $50 million contract range, you're having to basically trade away 3 starters and 2 key bench players, which is crazy.
It really is. And I think that right now that is where one of these trades, look, while it could cost a lot in terms of like future assets or picks or anything like that, yeah, you're true. You're not breaking up a full core of your team, trading all like many starters or anything like that. So I could definitely see why there's teams right now that are interested and have what it takes to be able to facilitate a deal, at least salary wise. So that is the interesting thing. But man, that dude is going to cash in when his time comes because he has absolutely outplayed that contract that he signed quite a few years ago.
Absolutely. Do you have any other pros for Lauri Markkanen here?
I would just say overall, it was more of just, from 3-point land, he's going to make Indiana one of the best, 3-point shooting teams. Last year, Indiana ranked ninth in 3-point percentage. Him being a near 38% 3-point shooter for his career would be awesome. Shows it's not a fluke. The 8 rebounds per game would be huge for the Pacers that ranked 28th in the NBA in rebounds. So I just feel that there's a lot to like. But those were the majority of my pros.
Okay, I'm going to draw a little bit of a parallel here to a player that was previously on the Pacers and became the face of the franchise for a hot minute, and that's Victor Oladipo. Victor Oladipo was on the Orlando Magic, and then he got traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder in a deal where he was there for about a year, and then he got traded to Indiana where he became an all-star. Lauri Markkanen, drafted by the Chicago Bulls, I think 6th or 8th overall, something around that range, was traded.
Seventh.
What was it, 7th?
Yes.
Okay, so then he was traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers, played 1 season there, and then he was flipped to the Utah Jazz for Donovan Mitchell, where he became an all-star in his first year with the Utah Jazz. And to me, that does seem very similar that some guys just develop later. And I think part of that is that Lauri ended up having some injuries that were a bit of a concern. I'm sure we'll talk about that in the cons, but I definitely want to say this. He's still young enough, but I kind of wonder how he would fit in as a second or third guy versus the guy like he has been in Utah, or yeah, in Utah, because in Cleveland he wasn't that. In Chicago, he never really became that. So now that he knows what it takes to be an all-star and get to that point, being in kind of a losing situation here in Utah, there's been reports that says he wants to be there, right? So I'm not going to discredit that. He might still want to stay there. But if a team could trade for him and fit him in perfectly, I think a pass first point guard in Tyrese Halliburton would be the perfect fit for him. And then you've also got Pascal Siakam, who isn't a guy that has to have the ball 24/7, that would be willing to kind of share the floor with him. So I think that if he could embrace, and this is more of like a wishful thinking maybe thing, but like if he can embrace being the number 2, number 3 guy, to me, that is a pro if he could be that, because I don't necessarily see Lauri Markkanen being the number 1 on a team and that team making it super far into the playoffs, probably not even winning a round. But if he's a third guy on a team, I would feel pretty good about that if he is this version that we've seen the last 2 seasons in Utah.
He can't be the guy. He just cannot. You look at the Jazz, where he's been the guy. The Jazz haven't finished higher than 12th in the West in either of the last 2 seasons. Personally, I think Lauri would be an elite third option on a team, like elite, like the best, like the Chris Bosh of a third option to what Bosh was to the Miami Heat when they were winning championships. I think Lauri can be a very good number 2 as well. I definitely do. If he's the guy, when you're talking about making a run in the playoffs, I think it's hard to even make the playoffs if he is your number 1, because his stats probably are a bit inflated due to being the number 1 guy on a team that's not winning many games. So I think the first thing that if someone's going to expect him to put up 25 points per game on the Pacers, you might be a little bit disappointed just because there's a lot more mouths to feed, which is a good thing. There's a lot of talent, but I definitely do think that he would instantly make any team better.
Let me ask you this. We saw that the deal became official for the New York Knicks to acquire Mikal Bridges. We saw Mikal Bridges kind of go from the Phoenix Suns to the Nets, where he became the number one guy, was never able to become an all-star. Lowry was. Is it safe to say that Lauri Markkanen is a better overall player and a better option as a second or third option than a Mikal Bridges?
That's tough. That's tough. I think for Larry, it was he had such a drastic improvement in 1 year. Like we talked about, most improved player of the year. Like his stats jumped 11 points per game in one season from the next.
Yeah.
So I think that was like, you gotta reward this guy. And the Jazz weren't winning games. They weren't. I think they started that season not as bad as they finished it. But I think for Bridges, you probably saw it. It's a very fair comparison. Like,
Mm.
if Bridges is the number one guy in the Nets, look at the Nets record. Not good.
Mm.
I think we're going to see Bridges probably take a solid step back, moving forward, with the Knicks, because there's so many other mouths to feed. But I think that Larry probably had, at least on the offensive side, probably a higher ceiling, I would say, than
Mm.
Bridges.
Yeah, because Bridges went from 17.2 points per game in 2022, 2023, and then to 26.1 when he was traded to the Nets for the final half of that season. But then just last year, only averaged 19.6 points as kind of the guy for the Nets. So to me, I'm not trying to sit here and be hypocritical or anything like that, or just trying to cause a fight here between us and Knicks fans. But I will just say this: I think that Lauri Markkanen has a higher ceiling and is a better player than Mikal Bridges. I just think Mikal Bridges fits what New York wants to do, so it makes a lot of sense what they're trying to do. But I would just say overall, I think that you're going to get more bang for your buck with Lauri Markkanen than Mikal Bridges.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, I think for Bridges, definitely a better two-way player, but I think that, does Bridges have, 25 points per game in him? Probably not. I think that Marketing has that. I think he's definitely a much better shooter, things like that, rebounder. But Bridges, I think, probably fits a lot more teams, being able to slide in, guard those wings. So I could definitely see both teams having a need and a lot of interest for both players.
We've been speaking about the good. Now let's get into the bad, Facci, because this is where it really makes this conversation more interesting. Give me one con for why you think the Pacers should not trade for Lauri Markkanen.
Only 1 year remaining on his contract, probably headed towards a max contract. I think at this point, it's something that, trading for him is half the battle. You could trade for him, you're going to give up some assets for sure, probably more than you'd want to, but it's that contract that's hanging over your head, knowing you pull off that trade, you better be ready to commit to a max contract, because that's just what the going rate seems to be these days.
Yeah, I was gonna basically jump on that point and piggyback off that because I think that Danny Ainge is one of the most horrible people to deal with in the NBA. We've talked
Worse.
about that. It's like dealing with the devil, right? He basically held Gordon Hayward ransom in Boston, wouldn't trade him to Indiana when Indiana wanted to make the deal. They were going to offer Aaron Holiday plus Miles Turner plus a pick. He said, no, I don't like Turner. I don't want that kind of player on my team. We're going to just ride it out. Where else is Hayward going to go? Hayward called his bluff, signed a 4-year deal with the Charlotte Hornets. So, Danny Ainge is very specific with what he wants. And if you don't give him what he wants, then you're not going to get the player that he has. Even if they know they don't want to pay Lauri Markkanen a max contract into this rebuild, right? Because they're trying to keep their cap space, open. They're trying to have flexibility, but they're going to get a lot of people bidding for him. And I know there's some interesting stuff that you text me about this extension from Andy Larson on Twitter. He tweeted this, and there was some really unique stuff here about how the Jazz can kind of go about extending Lauri Markkanen. So if you have that information, that'd be great to share.
I do. It's very, very interesting. So, next season's trade deadline is February 6th. All right. It's 8 days before All-Star weekend. So, and this is really important because for Marketing, he can't be traded for 6 months after signing his extension if he signs one in Utah. So, 6 months after August 6th is February 6th. So, there is this very small window where Lauri Marketing would have to sign a contract and then could be traded. If he signs after August 6th, he is ineligible to be traded during next season, which complicates everything. So here's how we got it. If an extension is hashed out immediately with the Jazz on August 6th because Markkanen's not eligible to be extended yet, then all of a sudden everything could work out. If the Jazz drag their feet a little bit, sign him to an extension, he will be ineligible to be traded to any other team. And the Warriors who are interested, they're going to stop calling, things like that. His interest will die out pretty quickly, and teams may revisit it in next offseason.
It makes you wonder if the Jazz would agree to an extension so quickly with Markkanen, only because I think it hurts their flexibility to try to move him. Mm-hmm. Right? Because I'm assuming it's going to be a poison pill type thing if they do sign it. So now you're only talking about teams that have cap space can trade for him, because we've seen how these extension things work in previous years, and it gets kind of crazy, especially with the first and second apron now in the new CBA and how tight that is and the penalties there are for going into those aprons and things like that. So that's something to keep an eye on. I just don't understand why they would do an extension at this point. I think, to me, it makes more sense for Lauri to kind of go into free agency, figure out what his market is, unless he kind of wants to do a Pascal Siakam thing where he sees they're on a team that's tanking. They want to go after some of these. Cooper Flagg is that the guy that's really big in this upcoming draft class, right? 2025. So they might be like, you know what? We want to go after Cooper Flagg. We want to do everything we can to be one of the worst teams in the NBA and hopefully have better luck in the lottery than the Detroit Pistons, who fall back to 5 every year, it feels like. But I will just say this. I think that it would be really smart of Lauri to kind of work with the front office of Utah to say, these are the destinations I want to go, similarly to what Pascal Siakam did. That way they can try to find a deal for him right around that trade deadline time so that he can get a feel for that team before he goes into free agency, because we saw how beneficial that was for Indiana to be able to get Pascal in early. And I know we're talking about cons here, but I'm just wanting to hash this out as well because I think it's really interesting. Because if they don't, it's a big risk. And I think that the value for Markkanen is probably going to get worse and worse as each day passes, because the closer he gets to that contract expiring, the less they're going to get in return for him.
Oh, no doubt about it. I remember it was, when we looked at us and everybody else looked at Toronto last year, and they were like, we're calling your bluff. You're not keeping OG and Siakam. Everybody knows you have to move these players. And the longer they waited, I definitely think that they probably could have gotten more on some of these offers, earlier on. But I think they kind of dragged their feet. They could have traded, OG or Siakam a year before and probably gotten a lot more, but they held on too long. And that brings me to my point before when I'm talking about if he is going to get a max contract, which I would absolutely believe that he would. Can Indiana afford 3 max contracts between Halliburton, Siakam, and Lauri Markkanen? And then you look at that. If Indiana was to do that, they're ultra committed to, then you got to be a team that might be in the second apron, or things are going to be really, really tight. And the Pacers have never been in that spot where they're saying, yeah, you know what, we're willing to be all in, be a team that's deep into the tax, penalties. And with that second apron over there, that makes me say, hey, would Indiana commit to, paying all that extra money to have a team in place that, like this? They've never been in that spot before.
Yeah, it's definitely a spot Indiana's never really been in. And I think one question that you have to ask yourself is, now the right time to start trying to contend for a title. I think that last year you maybe felt good about where you got by getting to the Eastern Conference Finals and challenging Boston, although you got swept. But do you really think that you have what it takes? And if you feel like it, then I respect them for doing it. But if you don't feel like you have what it takes right now by acquiring Markkanen to overthrow the reigning champs of Boston Celtics, then is this the time to do it? And I think that's a big con for me, is like the timing of this move. Does it make sense for Indiana? I can argue both sides of it, but I think more people would push on the side of no, it doesn't make sense right now to push all your chips in while you have all these guys still on rookie contracts. Because if you do that, now you're saying, okay, this is our window. You got to trust that you're going to re-sign Markkanen. If you don't and he walks for nothing, now you've traded picks plus players you just drafted in the last couple of years to even get him away from Utah. And you're in a worse spot than you were. So unless you can, honestly say, we know Markkanen's going to re-sign with us, we can offer him the most money, we believe he's worth a max, then I don't think you do it. But At the same time, do you feel like you are able to really contend with the Knicks, with the Celtics, with the healthy Bucks, with the new look Philadelphia 76ers? And if you feel like this move puts you over the top, then do it. But if you don't, now's not the time.
And that's the thing is like, look, if you say, does adding marketing make this team better? Absolutely. It definitely does. Does it push you into a championship category? I don't know. I really don't. Like it's easy to say, what do you mean? This is definitely a better team than the conference finals team. Yeah, it is. But the rest of the league, some other teams, like you said, 76ers, they look a lot better. The Knicks look a lot better. Other teams are going to be better. So this would be the Pacers all in move. And one of the things that it would do, if you trade for Lauri Markkanen, bye-bye Miles Turner. Absolutely,
Yeah.
there's going to be no way that there is going to be Miles Turner money available. The Pacers would have to let him walk because there's no scenario where Turner's going to, come back for $20 million. And even then, you wouldn't have $20 million to give him if you have
Yeah.
3 max contracts. So that's something that you would definitely start to watch the pieces around the Pacers crumble of Turner leaving. Maybe you don't have that money for, a Nemhard extension. That's definitely something that could be out there. Is how you going to pay Nemhard potentially close to the $18 million or so that you could. So you'd start to see, their own players that would either need to be traded or, let go in free agency because this is not a move that then you would have money to make other moves afterwards.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing to talk about here, Facci, and I know this isn't really a pro or a con, but it's just an interesting thing to talk about. If you bring in Markkanen and he just outplays Siakam as a number 2 guy and becomes Tyrese's number 2, do you look at yourself and say, okay, Lowry's 27, going to be 28 this season. Pascal will be 31. He's got 3 years less, age-wise on him. Does it make sense to now try and flip Pascal somewhere else after you just signed him? I get it. You don't really love the idea of that, but after next season, when it comes to paying Lowry and you got to pick between the two, would you pick between a guy that maybe fits your system a little bit more and a guy that we're actually interested in before Pascal? Or do you reward loyalty and keep Pascal and then, just suck it up with Lowry and pay the tax, and pay the second apron penalties? Because once you get into the second apron, I know that it's very expensive, but if you feel that confident in your team, I think you have to bring Turner back. I think you have to bring Nimhard back because if you're already there, you just deal with the penalties for a year and hopefully you reap the benefits of that by winning a lot of games. Because if that's your starting 5 of Halliburton, Nimhard, Markkanen, Siakam, and Turner, that's a pretty freaking awesome starting 5 that could really be competitive for a long time, at least for the entirety of Pascal's contract. So I just wonder, though, if you have to pick between the two and Markkanen kind of separates himself over Pascal, do you maybe just say, hey, Pascal, thanks for the 2 years that we had here, but might need to find you a new home?
Oh, that would be really tough. It honestly kind of made me a little upset even hearing it because it's just like, it felt like for us to go after Siakam, make the trade, get him to re-sign, all that, like that was huge to be like, hey, look, you can come to Indiana, you could be happy, you could win games, we'll pay you well, like all that. I felt like that was a great message to the league. To be able to move on from him, for Larry just makes it feel like such a business, and that's what it is. But I definitely, it's hard to not agree with that. He is 4 years younger and definitely in his prime. Where Siakam, you get the feeling that, he's going to be good. He's going to be good. But you would like to say his better years probably just happened and he's in the midst of, compared to that's just how it is in the NBA. I feel like your prime is anywhere between 25 to 30 years old or so.
Yeah.
I don't want to be already being like, hey, you know what? Yeah, we could just trade Siakam. It just sounds wrong to even
Yeah.
say.
No, I totally feel you. And if you're listening to this on Monday morning, there's a Pascal Siakam press conference that's taking place at 11 a.m. So I think that they feel pretty confident in Pascal being here long term. They want him here. I'm not saying they should do that. I'm just saying if it all came down to money and you had to pick between the two, who would you pick? But I think at this point, and I know it's not my money, and I know I shouldn't be saying this, but Herb Simon's not getting any younger. He's the oldest
True.
owner in the NBA, I believe. So We've seen a lot of ownership change hands recently. We've seen like the Celtics, they just won the championship. Now their owner's selling a majority of the team, right? So I'm just saying, Herb Simon, you've been pretty, you safe with your money. Let's just call it safe. You're spending a lot of money, but you refuse to go into the tax. If you're going to go into the tax and try to win a championship and get into that first, second apron, whatever it might be, is it worth it to go after Lauri? If you feel like it is, then pay the money. If you feel like that group of Pacer players can fit well enough together to actually go out there and win a championship, then please, I want to see them actually back their words up by saying, you know what? If we feel like we can put together a championship team, we'll pay the tax. We'll go into those aprons. They've said that I don't know how many times defending Herb Simon, saying he is willing to pay the tax. We've never seen it, but I think now would be a great time for him to say that and prove that if they can actually get Markkanen on the Pacers, even if they have to offer him a max contract and they're in that second apron, Facci, with limited ability to make moves. But I think they would have enough on this roster that they could do a consolidation trade to make it make sense.
That's the thing. You make this trade, you have to commit to being a second apron team, not even just first. You have to just say, all right, that's it. It is what it is. We're going to spend. We're as close as we've been to a championship in 25 years, since making the finals in 2000. And yeah, at the end of the season, when Chad Buchanan said, hey, Herb's willing to spend, we just haven't been in position to have the right roster to spend. It's like, we look at this offseason, it was extremely important to re-sign Siakam and Obi Toppin. But then you look at what else did we do? It's like we signed James Wiseman. It's like for the minimum. That's it. It's like right now, the Pacers look like they have enough for a veteran minimum contract, and that looks like that's the end of the roster in terms of changes. So we didn't see them push the chips in forward and make that next move. This would be that big splash that you wonder, does management, does the front office, does ownership have it in them to make that next big move? Or does it already feel like, well, we made a move, like it could be too risky? And it could be, which brings me into my next point. The most games that Lauri Markkanen has ever played is 68 games, and it was his rookie season. Only twice has he played above 61 games. For reference, that's 74% of the season. That means that you're getting Markkanen for 3/4 of a season. So is it worth it to have him for 3/4 of a season on a max contract with the trade assets that you had to give up for him? That's when you got to look at it and say, oh man, what are the odds that he does play 72 games, 75, anything like that, when it feels like the new norm is, could you play 65 games?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can push back on that and say is like, okay, look at OG Anunoby. That guy cannot stay healthy. But the Knicks gave him, I believe it was a max contract, for whatever that was worth.
It was a little bit less, but still well over $200 million.
Right. A crap load of money.
Yes.
For a guy that can't stay healthy, has yet to really prove he can be healthy. And I like OG Anunoby a heck of a lot. So it's not that I'm down on the guy. I will say this. If Markkanen maybe plays in a different system, does it help? Does the wear and tear of the running up and down and playing so fast actually cause more injuries to him? Or is this just kind of a fluke thing, Flash, where maybe he didn't play as much with Utah because he was dealing with tanking a little bit, injuries that maybe weren't really injuries, resting, because if he was out there, they had a better chance of winning. Obviously, I don't think that was really the case with Chicago or Cleveland, but the last couple of years, maybe he could have been a little bit more healthy than they said he was. I'm not really sure the exact injury history on him. I'm sure you have that up somewhere, or at least know some of the injuries he's dealt with. But I just feel like, hey, you know what? If he plays 75% of the games and he's healthy for the playoffs, that kind of seems like the new norm for today's NBA.
Yeah, I think the new norm is if you played 65 games, you did your part. And, when looking at OG's history, he's actually has more seasons in his career where he's played 65 games.
Then,
given it was early on, his rookie year he played 74, second year 67, third year 69, and then 2 seasons ago he played 67 games. So he's hit that mark more times, and I know that was definitely a knock that you had against him, and it's rightfully so. This is a guy who has been hurt. But Lauri has been hurt as well. Probably will sign for more money, just given that I feel like the Knicks were like trying to figure everything out. Like, could this guy take a little bit less and this guy take a little bit less, and maybe they could re-sign Hartenstein. It didn't work out, but I think that's what you got to be wondering is, okay, if you're Indiana and you have one more last swing at things, is Lauri Markkanen the guy for, 3/4 of the season to be a second apron team? And for that, it has me a little bit shook.
Yeah. I think that might be part of the reason why you haven't heard Indiana rumored to have interest in Lauri Markkanen. It's pretty clear that Golden State is the team that's most interested, and then San Antonio has also been thrown in there. I'm
Yep.
kind of curious where San Antonio is at now, since they just made a trade to acquire Harrison Barnes from the Sacramento Kings in a three-team deal that got them DeMar DeRozan, which we'll talk about on the next episode. But I definitely just feel like it's really interesting to kind of see what teams could go after Markkanen, what teams make sense, and what teams are offering. Because I look at Golden State's roster and all their young pieces that they have, they're pivotal parts of what they're trying to do right now. And I don't think they're going to move them to try and get a guy like Lauri Markkanen, where Indiana, maybe some of their young guys are kind of, you know, a little bit behind schedule in terms of like where maybe you think they might deserve to be at, like a guy like Jarris Walker. He might end up being the 11th man in the rotation starting off the season. Like there's a good chance that Ben Shepherd gets minutes over him because Carlisle trusts him. Matherin, a guy that still might not be starting next year. Maybe you feel like he should be because he has the higher ceiling than Andrew Nemhard, but maybe Rick Carlisle doesn't trust him. So if those two guys have to be in a deal to get Markkanen, and you kind of feel like they're not basically contributing at the level that they need to for what you drafted them for, and you're trying to win now, it could make sense to move those guys. Not saying they should, but I'm just saying it could make sense if you're Indiana trying to figure out a consolidation trade to get everybody involved. But you can tell right now Indiana is wanting to win. They re-sign Pascal to the max. They re-sign Obi Toppin, bring him back, and said, you know what? We don't really care if it's going to stunt Jarris's growth because we like what Obi brought to our team last year and helped us win more games. So that to me is, kind of just aligns with like injury wise. If they feel like Lowry is the guy and they don't have to give up as much, or maybe they have to give up guys that they're not totally sold on yet to fit their team, and they feel like Lowry can be the fit, I think it makes sense. But the injuries are a massive concern because if you can't stay healthy, we say it every time at nauseum, the best ability is availability.
Sure. And we've all known that the consolidation trade, it's coming at some point.
Yeah.
It just is. This Pacers team is too talented to have guys not playing. So at some point, Indiana will come across the right deal. There is definitely people that will be listening to this right now and saying, we have to do this deal. Then there's the other side that says, well, you know what? I might want to just wait for who else could be out there because there could be someone that is a little bit healthier, someone who plays a little bit more defense, which is what the Pacers need, someone that might be kind of that tier below a max contract where it kind of does work out to be able to keep some of the other players that will be coming up for new deals. So, I think when we went through our pros and cons list, I think there was great points made on both sides that could really make a tough argument to sway you in either direction.
Absolutely, Facci. So anything else con-wise you want to bring up for marketing?
No, I just think, when we talk about the competition, you mentioned Warriors and Spurs. When you look at the Spurs, if draft picks is what the Jazz want, the Spurs are locked and loaded with draft picks. I mean, they have done such a masterful job acquiring picks. Even for just next year, they own, the Hawks first round pick. Yeah, there's certain protections, but there's a scenario where it could be the Hawks first round pick, their own pick, the Spurs, the Chicago Bulls if it falls outside of the top 10, the Charlotte Hornets if it falls outside of the top 14, and then so on. They have so many picks. They keep acquiring new ones. They acquired a pick swap with Sacramento for taking on Harrison Barnes. They did that deal on draft night to acquire, unprotected pick swaps with the Minnesota Timberwolves years from now. So they're playing chess right now. They have young players. Then we hear there's this substantial offer that the Warriors have. They're trying to keep Jonathan Kuminga out of the deal. They have picks. What else could they offer? Who knows? But everybody looks at the Warriors and they see like some stale milk. There's that expiration date that's approaching on that roster. And that could be really appealing to get, picks that could be 2030 or 2029, anything in that range. So, if you're Indiana, I definitely think that you have the young talent to be able to get this type of deal done. And then you have to find that combination of what's the amount of picks that could be included. That's not too many, knowing that you already owe a 2026 first rounder to Toronto.
Yeah, the first pick Indiana can actually trade is a 2028 first round pick because of the step-in rules. You cannot trade 2025 or 2027 pick because you cannot trade consecutive picks back to backs or in a row. So basically, Indiana could trade swaps if they wanted to. They could do a 25 swap, a 27 swap. They could do all the swaps they want, but they just cannot give away draft picks until 2028, and they can't give a 2029 draft pick either. They have to be 2030 because, like I said, you cannot give them in consecutive years. But speaking of trades, I think this is a good time to kind of segue into what would be the cost for Lauri Markkanen if the Indiana Pacers wanted to make a trade. So we both have a couple ideas here, Facci, but if you're Indiana and you're Utah and you think you're having a conversation, what do you think the asking price from Utah is for this deal to get done?
Okay, so here's my first trade. Now, this is the trade that I would imagine that Utah is asking for, or at least or the Pacers might be willing to do if Andrew Nembhard will not re-sign here. I think that the Pacers could potentially offer Andrew Nembhard, Obi Toppin, a 2028 first, and a 2030 swap. I said a swap because Andrew Nembhard would be the big piece going to Utah that I think they could very much have interest in. You look at long-term at point guard, I think that he would definitely be someone that they would want. And it's just for Lauri straight up. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think the Jazz do that deal. I think there's better deals out there, number one. And number two, I don't think that the deal can work like that because I don't think Obi Toppin can be traded for a while because he just signed a new contract. So there is limitations to how many days it can be till he is traded since he just re-signed, I believe. I know that there's a signing period where
I think it's like 6 months.
I don't think it's 6 months. I think it's like 90 days.
Yeah, it might be. It might be that. I know that there's usually that span, like sometimes it's December 15th, where players,
Right.
that it's signed are now eligible. So it'll be somewhere in that span. I guess they would technically say that Obi Toppin, re-signed, I guess yesterday or when we're recording this on July 6th. So you don't have to wait a couple months, but in terms of if that can't happen, of course, I got some other trades, but let's hear your first one.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that is what Utah would accept because I feel like there's a lot better deals out there. So
gotta start small though.
Yeah, so here's a trade idea that I came up with, and we can talk about this because I think it's pretty interesting. Isaiah Jackson, Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker, and Kendall Brown's non-guaranteed contract, plus a 2028 first-round pick and a 2030 first-round pick to the Jazz for Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler.
Right. So I knew you were going that route. I got something somewhat similar, but I want to dissect yours first. Jarris Walker, Benedict Mathurin, right?
Yep.
Isaiah Jackson and Kendall Brown, and then a 2028 and a 2030 first round pick. Okay, so they don't really care too much about Kendall Brown. That's whatever. Mathurin, Jarris Walker, Ijax. So when I went through this and I started to see, okay, would they want Jarris Walker or not? You all got to remember, the pick after, I believe it was the pick after Jarris Walker was Taylor Hendricks. Taylor Hendricks was picked within a few picks at least. Same position. So that's where I'm like, you know what? You bring on Jarris Walker, you potentially bury Taylor Hendricks. Maybe you can play him out of position, whatever. But they're in that same kind of boat where he didn't get enough playing time. I definitely think that there's a lot more firepower in that deal. So sticking on that, we'll come back to that in 1 second because I have a very similar deal.
Okay.
So this is what I had. So for Lauri and Walker Kessler, it's Aaron Nesmith, Benedict Mathurin, Isaiah Jackson, 2028 first and a 2030 first. Which deal do you think they'd be more likely to take?
I think they take the deal that I proposed because they're getting 2 lottery picks.
I think yours is better. Yours is definitely better. Mine, I kind of try to keep Jarris Walker back, knowing that they got Taylor Hendricks, knowing that maybe there could be that opportunity for Indiana to work him in. But I also looked at this deal probably the same way that you look at it. You bring in Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler becomes the Miles Turner replacement.
Yep.
He's much cheaper. He's under contract for the next 2 seasons, and then Indiana can figure it out after that. So I think we're in the same agreement for most of the framework, except you have Jarris Walker in for Aaron Nesmith. I would love to be able to keep Nesmith. It'd be great, but I could definitely see them saying, you know what, Jarris Walker will have interest in. We'll figure it out position wise. Either him or Hendricks can move to the 3 if they have to.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's more potential for Walker to be a 3 than Taylor Hendricks. I
Probably.
think with Indiana, if
Yeah.
you're trying to win now, you probably want to hold on to Neesmith. And I know that sounds crazy to think of, oh my gosh, we can't trade Neesmith, but
Yeah.
I'm not saying
Okay.
that. But if you're basically saying, okay, we can have a starting lineup of Tyrese Halliburton, Aaron Neesmith, Lauri Markkanen, Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner, that feels pretty good because I think for this deal to go through, I guarantee you Utah is saying swap out Andrew Nemhard for Kendall Brown, and we'll say it's a deal. Where
Ah,
I think Indiana would say no. And I think
yeah.
that's where it would get really interesting because you're basically saying we want Walker Kessler. Now, he wasn't a lottery pick, but he was a first round pick. I think he was in the 20 range by the Minnesota Timberwolves, and he was acquired in that deal to get Rudy Gobert. So, but there's been talks about them wanting to trade Walker Kessler. There's been rumors
There has.
about that floating around. I think the Knicks have even shown interest in trading for him. So, to me, yes, he's an unfinished product. I think there's still some room to grow there for him. But even if he isn't the eternal replacement, he's a great backup. And I think that there might be some more skill developed there than an Isaiah Jackson. But at the same time, one of the reasons why Neesmith might make sense is I can't remember if Danny Ainge was still a part of the Celtics at this time. I don't think he was, but the Celtics were very high on Neesmith when he was drafted. And I think Brad Stevens, I don't know if Brad Stevens was a coach or not when Neesmith was drafted. I'm kind of drawing a
He
blank here
was.
on all
He was.
that.
No, no, he was. He was definitely the coach,
Okay.
and I believe that Danny Ainge was there.
Okay. So that could definitely play a factor into maybe Ainge is like, I love the player Neesmith has become. I want to get him here. I want to flip that contract because he's on a bargain deal and they could probably get a lot of money out of him if they wanted to move him somewhere else in a consolidation trade. Like, I just feel like it gives them some options, but bigger fish right here with 2 lottery picks and back to back drafts and Matherin and Walker.
Yeah, I definitely think that if they're asking for Nemhard in that deal instead, you don't do that deal. It's a lot, knowing that you already need to. Um, okay, so confirmed Danny Ainge was with the Boston Celtics when they drafted Aaron Neesmith. So that could definitely be something where he could be, all right. And people got to remember, Neesmith's only 24 years old. So
Yeah.
he very much is still a young player. It's not like this is some guy who's like 27, 28 or anything like that. So he definitely fits the timeline of a young team. He's under contract at a great rate of about $11 million per year. So in my trade, it's obviously, hey, is this something the Pacers could get away with? I think yours is probably more of the this is what it would take to get a deal done.
Yeah.
And to me, man, when you're talking about Jarris Walker, Matherin, and 2 first-round picks, Isaiah Jackson, I think we could say, hey, you know what, if he's
Yeah.
traded, he's traded. Same with Kendall Brown. But man, it just feels like a lot to give up. But I also do think that Walker Kessler is someone that could be a good addition for the Pacers. He's a good rebounder. He's I don't know if the 3-point ball, I don't know if that'll ever really be there, but I definitely just think that he's a really good shot blocker. Each of the last 2 years averaged 2.3 blocks, 2.4 last year. He was, I believe, all rookie first team, or I want to say he was, or at least was just a really, really good rookie. And I believe in him long term. So I think if it comes down to my deal, I feel more comfortable doing my deal because it doesn't include Jarris Walker. I think your deal, like I said before, is probably what it might take to get it done. But before I turn it over to you, we're hearing that the Jazz want to prioritize younger players instead of picks. I think your deal is, to me, feels like probably the best deal that they're going to get of
Yeah.
young players that are under team control with draft picks. And that 2028, 2030, first round picks for the Pacers, those could end up being valuable long term, especially if they're unprotected.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of intrigue here. I'm just kind of curious exactly how it all plays out because, I mean, Indiana definitely has a package to go get him. I think if they want him, it's just a matter of are they willing to kind of gamble on going after him, right? And trading away some of their young guys because I think if any Pacer fans listening to this and hearing, oh, we got to give up Matherin and Walker and potentially Nemhard, like a 3-for-1, I'm not doing this deal. I mean, every Pacer fan, but I understand why I would say no. I think that it's a very hard pill to swallow. And I actually asked Mark Wallen, who is a former colleague of ours over at the 5x5 back in like
Yeah.
2019. He's a Jazz guy, and so I asked him what it would take for what kind of deal would you want from Indiana for Lauri Markkanen, and I just wanted to get a Jazz perspective, and he said all three of those guys, Walker, Nimhard, and Mathurin. I'm just like, I just can't do that. I think that for a guy that has an expiring contract that's going to be offered a max deal, that's not really proven he is a max player, except for a short stint on a tanking team. I just think that the cost is too much. And I still kind of feel like everything that I put out there is too much. I feel like if I'm Indiana, this is not the guy that I would want to go all in for if I'm making an all in move. Now, there are people out there, and I've seen Pacer fans that say, if we get Lauri Markkanen, that is the missing piece. And maybe it is, but it just feels like it's so much to give up, especially so early on in these guys' career. Jarris Walker, I think, is 20 years old. To give up on him so early, Benedict Mathurin, 21, for a guy that's really good, just seems a little bit too steep for me.
It's too steep. There's still a scenario. There really is still a scenario that Benedict Mathurin could just be a really good player in this league. And one of those guys that you talked about earlier in the episode who gets traded to another destination and his game takes off. What if he just became a starter on the Jazz, no leash at all, just pure green light, and was able to go out there and just be himself? He could probably put up, 18 to 20 points in this league. What's the team's record? I don't know. But I definitely think that he's capable of that. For Jarris Walker, I just can't pull the plug yet and give up on him. I just feel that it's way, way too soon. So I think that it's just an overpay at that point. Someone will swoop in and trade for Markkanen. That will happen. I'm very curious to see what that deal is. The last deal that I had that did involve like an Obi Toppin or a player that can't be traded. Tell me this. Maybe I'm being cheap, but here's what we got. Lauri Markkanen for Aaron Nesmith, Benedict Mathurin, 2028 first, and the 2030 first. They're unprotected picks. What are your thoughts?
I think they're going to want two players that are not picks. I mean, that's just my opinion. I think they're going to want Nimhard and Mathurin, Walker and Mathurin, or Nimhard and Walker. Like, they're going to want two of those three guys, if not all three. So any deal that doesn't have all three of, or at least two of them involved, even if there's picks attached, I mean, you can throw swaps in there too. I just don't think they're going to do it. I hate to say that, but we talked about it. Danny Ainge is like dealing with the devil. So it's going to be hard to get a deal done with him that he's going to agree to. But I think the longer he holds on to Lauri, the harder it's going to get to trade him. So he could be paying him a max contract. Now, they could do a sign and trade and hold on to Lowry's bird rights and do a sign and trade next offseason and maybe try to find something that works for them. But most teams are really trying to be conscious of this first and second apron and their flexibility. So, the Jazz have cap space right now. They could make a bigger trade where they take back more salary to make a deal happen, and that could help them maybe try to flip some assets as well. But yeah, I don't hate your deal. I mean, if that was the offer, then I probably would do it if I was Indiana, because I think you're getting an upgrade over Nesmith. You give up on Mathurin, but you still keep Nimhard and Walker. So that to me is pretty enticing. I just, from what we've heard report wise and what we've seen that they're asking for, it appears that would not be enough.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be enough. I think at this date, when we're reporting this on July 7th, yeah, they could easily laugh in our face and be like, "Nope." You pick up the phone again when you're serious about a deal. And to us, hey, look, this is a good deal, but I definitely think that they're going to wait on this, make teams sweat it a little bit, and they can't wait too long though, because like we said, each week that goes by, each month as this goes on, there's going to be a little bit less. An unprotected pick could become a swap. There could be one less player in a deal. Little things like that. So I think if you're Golden State, you probably were panicking a little bit, knowing that Clay left. I think they've now put around some other pieces like, D'Anthony Melton, Buddy Hield. They added someone else I'm blanking on, but
Kyle Anderson. How'd you forget?
Kyle Anderson, my guy. I can't believe.
How do you
can't
forget
believe
Kyle Anderson?
Yeah, I don't. Such a star that I don't know how he went over my head. But
too bright for you, baby. Just
exactly
blinded you. You couldn't see him.
Blinded by the stars, man. What blank. But I think they put together a team now where they don't need to like sweat it so much if it's going to cost them an arm and a leg, because I think people need to look at it seriously and say, hey, you know what? This is a guy that is good, but isn't like that all NBA type player that you can't just sacrifice your full future for.
Absolutely, Facci. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I think me and you are both in agreement here that Lauri Markkanen, very talented player, asking price is too much for what Indiana would have to give up to get him. The contract they'd have to give him after this year makes it extremely more complicated. So I think we're both in the boat of we would understand why they would do it if they did it, but I think we would be a little bit nervous about how that window doesn't go from being this open to maybe to closing a little bit more. I think the window is a lot smaller for Indiana with what they're able to do if they were to make this trade. So I'm probably in the boat of like 70% no, 30% yes. From my standpoint, if they were to make this move, I could talk myself into it once it happens, but I think that I would rather just kind of see what this team can do first before they go out there and give up on some young guys for a guy, like you said, that really hasn't been able to stay healthy.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. It's like love his game. Think he's really good. I don't think he's the one. I would like to imagine that the grass could be greener, and maybe that grass ends up just being, a couple players together would afford you a little bit more of a team rather than you bring in Markkanen, but now all of a sudden you're saying goodbye to plenty of good players via trade, and then once they hit free agency or their time comes, not being able to match certain offers, anything of the sort, I think it would be, one by one dominoes would be falling on this team. So while it is very appealing and it is the sexy name that's available now, unfortunately, I'm out.
All righty. Just like Mark Cuban on Shark Tank, Facci is out. And with that being said, go ahead and let everybody know where they can find us at on social media.
Absolutely. So you can find us on Twitter at PacersPod STP. You can find Alex on Twitter at Alex Golden NBA. You can find me on Twitter at _FACCI. You could find us on Instagram at PacersPod STP. You can find us on Facebook at Setting the Pace. You can find us on TikTok at Setting the Pace. And Alex, tell them where they can check us out on YouTube.
Yeah, everybody, come on over to youtube.com/Setting the Pace, a Pacers podcast where you can find all of our video content. All of our new episodes will premiere at 10 a.m. the following day after we record it. So Monday, 10 a.m. is when this video is premiering. So if you made it all the way, thanks so much for listening. Subscribe to the channel, and hopefully you like our new graphics that we have just brought to the channel. Sorry it took so long. The Aaron E. Smith graphic about made me puke when I was doing it. So I had to come up and take some time to do something special, and hopefully you guys like the new look overlay that we have. So if you like it, please let us know in the comment section below. But Facci, if you're excited that the Pacers Summer League will be back in action in a couple of days, then hit me with those 3 words.
Let's go, Pacers.